Hi, welcome to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. It's Thursday, December 25th, and I'm Jessica Steinberg. I'm speaking today with political reporters Sam Sokol and Ariela Karmel. Hello, good morning to you both.
Morning.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi there. It is day 811 of the war. We will be covering different aspects of the Knesset today, mostly things that happened literally in the last 24 hours. We'll start with yesterday's vote in favor of the highly controversial bill to establish a politically appointed probe into the October 7th, 2023 failures rather than a state commission of inquiry. Sam will take us through that. Ariela will also talk us through Diaspora Affairs Minister Amichai Chikli's statements yesterday regarding the Qatargate affair, as well as a vote from the coalition's Knesset Speaker Amir Ohana in favor of a civil marriage bill. And Sam will talk us through an event, an anti-Haredi draft event in the very Anglo-Saxon community in Ramat Beit Shemesh. So stay with us for all of that. We'll be back in a moment.
3 million Israelis are dealing with trauma since October 7th. To help Israelis heal, Hadassah is there, with the largest rehabilitation center in Jerusalem, world-renowned medical centers, and youth villages. It's said, saving a life saves the world. Imagine helping millions. This is Hadassah, a life-changing force in Israel and the world.
Okay. So let's first start with this highly controversial bill, Sam, Likud MK Ariel Kalner's bill, which is essentially they passed the preliminary reading of this bill that would establish a politically appointed probe into the October 7th failures instead of the desired on the part of the bereaved families and many Israelis, instead of a state commission of inquiry. So the bill, the first reading passed, Sam. You want to take us through some of the back pieces of this before we get into the actual vote in favor of the first reading?
Well, since October 7th, pretty much from day one, there have been very loud and vocal demands for a state commission of inquiry, which is the strongest type of state investigation that can be launched. Generally speaking, the members of the committee are fully independent. They're chosen by the president of the Supreme Court, and they are able to summon witnesses, access evidence and documentation. And this is the gold standard used after most tragedies, whether military or civil. So in cases of failures in war, in cases like the Meron disaster a few years back, where safety lapses led to the trampling death of 45 people on pilgrimage in northern Israel. And Prime Minister Netanyahu has already been dinged in a couple of state commissions of inquiry. The State Commission of Inquiry into the Meron disaster listed Netanyahu as one of the officials responsible for the negligence and lack of oversight that led to these deaths. Another ongoing state commission of inquiry into a corruption scandal regarding the purchase of submarines, while it hasn't put out its final findings, has sent Netanyahu a letter saying that he's probably going to get hit hard by it, and that his actions have harmed national security. So from the beginning, while there are very loud voices calling for this, Netanyahu and his allies have been pushing back very hard against the idea of establishing a state commission of inquiry. At first, they were arguing that it was impractical to do so during the middle of military operations against Hamas in the immediate post-October 7th period. And later, their rhetoric shifted primarily to the fact that they don't trust the judiciary and they don't trust any commission appointed by the High Court of Justice. And this comes within the context of the government's efforts to push a judicial overhaul legislative agenda, which would effectively neuter the power of the High Court. So this is sort of Netanyahu killing two birds with one stone. He gets to continue his rhetoric against the court and to push off a investigation which he fears will cast him in a negative light. Now, in order to try to satisfy critics, including within his own party, and in order to deflect from the demands, what Netanyahu is trying to do is establish a commission whose membership he can control. So what Kellner's bill essentially says is that a supermajority of 80 out of 120 members of Knesset will be empowered to appoint a 6-member investigative committee, and that if there is no agreement on the composition of this committee after 2 weeks, both the opposition and coalition would be empowered to select 3 committee members each. However, and this is very key, if either side does not cooperate or can't settle on a candidate, the Knesset Speaker Amir Ohana, who is a member of Netanyahu's Likud party, would be able to choose their members for them. And given that
both for coalition and opposition, right?
For whichever side is unable or unwilling to choose. So if the coalition decides on a few people that Bibi wants and the opposition boycotts, then they get to choose the opposition as well. And this is now a certainty that if this passes, the entire thing will be controlled by Netanyahu and his allies, because the opposition has promised to boycott what they are calling a whitewashing or cover-up committee. Now, going even further in terms of control, the scope of the investigation would be determined by a ministerial committee led by the prime minister. And Netanyahu has already said he wants to widen the scope to examine the 1993 Oslo Accords, the 2005 disengagement from Gaza, and the anti-judicial overhaul protest movement from 2023. This has led to cartoons and memes of Netanyahu and Kellner going up, these are circulating around the internet, going up to the grave of David Ben-Gurion and asking, where were you on October 7th? And
examining everyone but the actions of his own government, in other words.
Exactly. And members of Netanyahu's government have been repeatedly saying, we have to probe the judiciary. They want to change the focus, and they want to be able to control who is on this committee. Now, Kellner has said, we have to look at everyone, including the political echelon. But there's a lot of doubt by people outside of Netanyahu's circles and supporters that this would happen. Now, they've been sort of mulling establishing some sort of alternative, commission for quite a long time. And they hadn't taken the step. They hadn't pulled the trigger. Last month, the cabinet voted to establish an alternate commission, but there was they needed to create a legal framework for this. So they used Kellner's proposal. Earlier this week, the Ministerial Committee on Legislation gave its backing, and then 2 days later, on Wednesday evening, it passed its preliminary reading, 53-48.
So what does that mean, Sam? Yeah, tell us a little bit about the reaction to it as that first preliminary reading passed. Preliminary reading, that would be the only words that we need at that point. And really, where do you think this takes us to? In other words, we know what happens next in terms of readings, but what is the likelihood of this being passed as a bill?
Well, it depends how fast they're able to get this to committee. They're bringing this to the Constitutional and Justice Committee for preparation for the first, second, and third readings necessary for this to pass into law. But Netanyahu is currently on politically shaky ground. He has to do a lot of political horse trading to get his budget passed. If it doesn't pass in the coming months, his government could fall. bringing early elections. Elections are now scheduled for the end of 2026. He's also dealing with, reportedly, though they deny it, threats from the Haredim to dissolve the government if it doesn't make immediate progress on the ultra-Orthodox conscription exemption law. There was one report recently that they're demanding, its passage by the middle of January. So Netanyahu's under, I think, a lot of pressure to get this done as soon as possible because the opposition has pledged that if they win the next elections and form the next government, one of the first things they will do in their first cabinet meeting will be to definitively establish a state commission of inquiry into Netanyahu and his government. There's definitely some anger, or not anger, pushback, I should say, within the coalition. Most of the coalition is fully behind Netanyahu on this, but there are some people who aren't. During the vote yesterday, MK Yuli Edelstein from Likud wasn't in the chamber. New Hope's Zev Elkin, who's a member of the cabinet, declined to vote. He stayed outside. He was the only member, reportedly, of the Ministerial Committee on Legislation who voted against this bill in that committee because he objected to the bill as written, to the fact that the coalition would be able to basically control the entire investigative panel. So, but they're a minority. Pretty much everyone came out behind it, and now it's just a question of how fast they can ram it through the Knesset.
Sam wrote about this, but there was a lot of very notable disruption when the vote was being held. All of the protesters in the gallery, who were members of families of
bereaved families
who lost family members on October 7th, and the Speaker of the House had to have various members of the opposition escorted out of the plenum while it was going on, and it was delayed because of the disruption. So there's a huge amount of opposition from the people who were most affected.
It happens so often in recent years with so much contentious legislation that it almost becomes something that it's become just expected. So thank you for actually mentioning that. But yeah, it was contentious. It was loud. People were dragged out of the chamber. Ariela is right. The tensions and emotions were running high.
Yeah, as they always do around this subject, and as they will continue to do so. Okay, so then moving to you, Ariela, and sticking with Knesset Speaker Amir Ohana, who of course is a member as well of the Prime Minister's coalition. He voted in favor. I believe he was the only member of his party to vote in favor of a civil marriage bill. He is a gay man who is married to a man. And he was the only one who voted in favor of it, and I'm curious to hear how that played out in terms of the bill and the coverage of that moment in the Knesset.
Right. So look, this bill that was presented by an opposition lawmaker from Yesh Atid, Moshe Tolpaz, it's one of these bills that the opposition puts forward. There isn't a lot of expectation that it will pass because they are lacking a majority in the Knesset, but it is to have on record that they are trying to implement something that is across Israeli society very much supported. There is no civil marriage in Israel currently. If you want to get married, it has to be done through the Rabbanut or other religious bodies. And they want it on record that this government is refusing to support this kind of measure. And it was interesting because it was expected that it wouldn't pass, that not only a member of Benjamin Netanyahu's party, but the Speaker of the House, Amir Ohana, who is a very powerful figure, voted in favor of it. And this has infuriated the ultra-Orthodox parties, all of whom commented with great outrage immediately following the vote. Even though, like I said, it wasn't expected to pass, it didn't pass. But that such a significant member of the government would vote in favor of it. And it should be added that Ohana is someone who the ultra-Orthodox parties I don't think it's an exaggeration to say have disdain for, and have repeatedly made incredibly incendiary, and I think you can just say homophobic remarks about him throughout his political career since he was elected Speaker of the House. They've never liked him. And so the fact that he was supporting a measure that they are all very opposed to was real cause for outrage. And several of them were suggesting that, this is another example of how the government, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, they say that explicitly, is at odds with and is violating agreements made between his party and the ultra-Orthodox parties. And as Sam has said, there's a huge
Shaky,
amount of tension
I
already
think it's
between
important
them.
to note when the ultra-Orthodox say that that Likud is violating coalition agreements with their parties, that Yadut Torah, United Torah Judaism, withdrew from the coalition. So I'm not sure that it's the most good faith argument to say you're violating your coalition agreement with us when they're no longer part of the coalition on their own volition.
Literally. Right. Makes sense. Okay. Let's go to a break, and when we're back, we'll talk about a few more things that were happening in the Knesset and generally in Israeli political life over the last couple of days. So stay with us.
What if prayer doesn't work? This question strikes us as a distinctly modern one, an outgrowth of the slow disenchantment of the world. But in truth, the question is an old one, and one given space to breathe here.
Welcome to Thoughts and Prayers. I'm your host, Jessica Fisher. Join me on a deep exploration of the relationship between religion and modernity through personal stories, classical texts, and conversations with leading rabbis, scholars, and educators.
You're almost not supposed to be doing this interview.
Our prayers accumulate on God's doorstep, piled outside like an unimaginably tall stack of letters. We cannot give up on the relationship because God doesn't come to the door as quickly as we may like. So let's keep knocking. Perhaps the gates of compassion will be opened.
Join us every week on Thoughts and Prayers wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay. Ariela, sticking with you for the moment, let's talk about Diaspora Affairs Amichai Chikli, who made a statement yesterday about the Qatargate affair, essentially saying that the government needs to look at this situation that is building because of very explosive comments made by former Netanyahu aides. First, I'm just going to say to you, I was kind of surprised that it was Chikli who is the one making the statement. I don't know what your thoughts are about that, unless you want to talk about that first or take us through what we are actually talking about here.
It is somewhat surprising just because Chikli is a relative Netanyahu loyalist. But I think that it's indicative of breaches within the party and how explosive the increasing revelations are about this scandal. You alluded to the comments that were made most recently by one aide in particular, former aide by Netanyahu, Eli Feldstein, who gave several interviews this past week. And he directly implicated the prime minister in the Bild affair, which is related to the Qatargate scandal. And I think that it's indicative of how explosive these revelations are and how they are rocking the coalition. Chikli said very candidly that there's no way to defend these allegations and that they need to be investigated fully. And it's a major departure from the rhetoric that we've heard from this government. Netanyahu has condemned the investigation into his aides, the allegations that have been made in general, both regarding himself and his former aides. He's called it a witch hunt. And so the fact that members of his government, also not just Chikli, also Eli Dalal, who's an MK,
But he has been making a few comments already, though, along the way, correct?
True,
Dalal.
that's correct. But this was a member of the government. He's a minister and a significant minister. And so the fact that he was doing it, I think, shows that he feels that there is enough support within his party to do so. The other thing that I wanted to add is in the he made these remarks in an interview with the Kan public broadcaster, and in the same session, Yair Lapid was also interviewed, and he was calling for investigation into a fourth aide. Up until now, 3 different former Netanyahu aides have been under investigation in the Qatargate scandal, and he was calling for investigation of Tzachi Braverman, who's Netanyahu's chief of staff, and he is set to assume the ambassadorship in the UK, which was a very significant post. And among the revelations that Feldstein shared were that Braverman was probably one of the most directly involved members of Netanyahu's inner circle in all of these dealings, which he's denied, which the Prime Minister's office has denied. But Lapid is saying, at the very least, this is a 4th person that needs to be included in the ongoing probe into what is being called one of the worst security breaches in Israeli history.
Ariela, just as you keep on covering this question, expectations on your part of what could happen next? Will we just hear possibly other Likud lawmakers, other coalition members coming forward? What are your thoughts about that?
I think it depends how the investigation continues. I think it will be very significant if Braverman is included and is questioned by police, because I think it's like a domino effect. It's a chain reaction. I think the fact that Chikli has felt comfortable enough to say this out loud indicates
at the plenum, right? Yeah,
exactly, in a very public fashion. Well, he gave the original interview in a radio interview, but he's made similar remarks in the plenum since. I think it does indicate perhaps a change on the ground, but who knows?
About Chikli,
yeah, Sam?
Interestingly enough, on the draft issue, he's also, he's a Netanyahu loyalist. He's generally toes the party line, but not always. On the draft issue, back when Yuli Edelstein was the chairman of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, and Defense Minister Katz and Netanyahu were trying to push him in a different direction to pass a law that would exempt Haredim, Chikli very publicly came to Edelstein's defense, actually going to an event for Likud backers of Edelstein in Jerusalem to speak, in favor of him. So, he is a loyalist, but it's not unprecedented that he's willing to take a stand, though it's not like an everyday thing.
It's notable, though. Yeah.
It's definitely notable.
Okay. Yeah. Sam, finally, before we close out this podcast, let's talk about this ultra-Orthodox event in Ramat Beit Shemesh. As you and I were discussing before we started recording, that it was very much the Anglo-Haredi world of Ramat Beit Shemesh, meaning the English-speaking Haredi ultra-Orthodox crowd in this anti-enlistment event. So take us through it. You wrote a reporter's notebook about it. Tell us a little bit about what you were seeing around you.
So, full disclosure, first of all, I'm speaking to you from Ramat Beit Shemesh, and I did serve 2 years in the IDF's ultra-Orthodox battalion, Netzach Yehuda, also known as Nachal Haredi. So I am coming sort of from that perspective.
You know that world. Yes.
I know that world very, very well. And so, long story short, English-speaking Haredim are much more likely to have higher education, to have a job, to serve in the army than native-born Israeli Haredim. There are people in my community here, guys, with long payas and black hats who look like they're Adam Yesharim, who served in the army, who work in high tech. I have friends
Not
who are
unusual.
very modern who wear strimals. But so it's a very different world than what people think of when they think of Israeli Haredim. And certainly not everyone who's an American Haredi is modern, but they're much more likely to be. And there are, anecdotally at least, a much larger proportion of Anglo Haredim than regular Haredim who are going to serve in the army. It's much more common and accepted. I have a Haredi cousin, lives a few blocks from me, had 3 kids in Gaza, There's a chassid from the local Chabad community who lost a son fighting in the war. So this is something that's been of concern to ultra-Orthodox leaders, that, look, here's a part of our community that's much more open to this, something they're very against. So they held a big event in Ramat Beit Shemesh the other night, featuring Rav Aaron Feldman, one of the members of the Council of Rabbis of Agudas Yisrael in America, the Rosh Yeshiva of one of the biggest yeshivas in America, a very big, prominent leader, and several other rabbis. And they basically spent an entire evening railing against enlistment in English at an event for English-speaking Haredim.
How many people were there?
There were probably around 100 or more. There were maybe
men, mostly?
There were several protesters outside, modern Haredi and Dati Leumi. So there were women outside protesting, but, it was sort of a cross-section. There were people there who were pro-enlistment, anti-enlistment, but the rhetoric the rabbis used was very notable, because they presented Jews almost as a superior species to Gentiles, and Haredim as a superior species within the Jews.
Jury.
It was really we're the best of the best. We're the elite. We're the most important. Secular Zionists are just going to go to oblivion, and we're the ones carrying the banner of Jewish identity into the future. And there was a great deal of, I don't want to sugarcoat it, lying about the army, claiming that more than half of national religious soldiers lose their religion, that over 80% of people, Nachal Haredi, my old unit, come out of the army, not Shomer Shabbat.
Not Sabbath observers.
Not Sabbath, exactly. And you had rabbis saying, listen, you're not equipped to understand. This was a major theme of the evening. You're Americans, you're naive, you're not equipped to understand what's happening here. You don't understand what's happening here. You have to obey the rabbis. Do what we say, because you're not capable on your own of understanding. And one older ultra-Orthodox man, just the picture of a Litvak, long bushy beard, suit, big velvet kippah, came up to me afterwards and complained. And he gave me one of the most intense quotes I've ever gotten in a story. He goes, I don't know whether I was listening to Al Sharpton or Adolf Hitler. And this is not, someone
Al
who's secular
Sharpton,
or
meaning
national.
the New York City council member of many years.
Yeah, and this wasn't someone who was modern Orthodox or secular, or this was a full-on hardcore Haredi saying this. So I think it speaks a lot to the difference in mentality. You have plenty of Anglo-Haredim who are against the draft, but it's much more accepted, and the rabbis are worried.
Well, we will obviously link to that as well, to all the pieces related to what we've spoken about today. Let's close out this daily briefing podcast. Thank you, Ariela, and thank you, Sam, for being with me today.
Pleasure.
It's been good to have you here.
Thanks, Jessica.
And thanks to all of you for listening to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Stay tuned for tomorrow's installment. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. As always, any comments you have, you can write us at podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until next time, take care, be well, and happy holidays to all those who are celebrating. Until next time.